Hey everybody, Jay Winters for University Lutheran here again. We are talking through our 100 Bible stories, and today we're talking about those Bible stories that happen when we are in Canaan, which is the Promised Land. This is the land that God promised to people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and now the people of God are finally getting in there. Moses has brought the people of Israel all the way through the wilderness, and now they're getting ready to go in, and so that's where we're picking this up. So today, what we're looking at in terms of the Canaan stories we are looking at Israel entering Canaan. That's Deuteronomy 34, 9 through 12, and Joshua 1. 1 through 16. Then we're looking at the fall of Jericho. And then we are looking at Gideon, and then Samson part 1, Samson part 2, Ruth, and then Samuel. So we're going to break those up into two different categories. Those two categories are right down here. So the first one is going to be entering Canaan, so just getting into the land of Canaan. And then the second one is going to be the period of the Judges. So there's this book in the Bible that's called the Book of Judges, and that book of the Bible is a particular book that has all of these stories about people that they call judges, who are sort of like heroes or leaders within Israel. And so we're going to be taking a look at their stories as well. So let's start off with entering Canaan, and we're going to get the entrance into Canaan. This has two stories. So Israel has now arrived at the Promised Land. They get right up to the where they can cross over, and they're going to cross over the Jordan River. And once they cross over that, they're going to be in this land that God has promised to them. But there's a problem. There's already people in the Promised Land, and so they have to figure out what to do with that. And also, there's another problem. Moses is not going to be with them. Instead, Moses has to hang back. He dies on the other side. He doesn't actually get to go into the Promised Land, but his second command gets to go into the Promised Land along with the people. So let's look at that first story. Israel enters Canaan. So, in this story, Israel gains a new leader. This new leader is called Joshua. Moses puts his hands on him. He places his hands on him as a sign that he is the person who is going to be taking over for Moses. Interestingly enough, that's also how pastors are made. So when I became a pastor, somebody laid their hands on me, and that was how I became a pastor. God tells him to be strong and courageous and to rely on God as Moses relied on God before him. As they do that, they're going to go into the land of Jericho, but that's our next story. So the next story here is the fall of Jericho. Jericho is one of the biggest, nastiest cities. It's one of the biggest cities that the people of Israel are going to have to take over in order to establish for themselves some space for themselves inside of this Promised Land, because there are all sorts of people there. The people of Jericho are also very wicked, and God wants the people of Israel to take them out. So it's not like God is saying, oh, well, like move these people that are completely innocent out, but rather the people of Jericho are all sorts of wicked. They're doing things like child sacrifice and other horrible things like that. So God is using his people in order to give them the Promised Land, but also to punish evil. And so the way that he does this is interesting. As the people march around the city, and as they march around the city, the people in Jericho are saying, well, what is going on here? And they march around the city 7 times. And when they march around the city the 7th time, they blow their trumpets, and the walls of Jericho literally crumble and crack. And that gives entrance to the army of Israel to enter the city and to attack that city. And so God works through sort of a miraculous means in order to get them into Jericho. After that, we are going to move out of the Canaan stories, and we're going to move into the period of the Judges. So we're going to go from entering Canaan and go into the period of the Judges. Like I said, these people are kind of heroes of the Old Testament faith. So we're going to start off over here with Gideon, and then we're going to move on to Samson, and then Ruth, who isn't really a judge, but she's during the period of the judges, and then Samuel, who is both the last judge. He's also kind of the first real prophet of Israel, and he's going to lead us into this time that we call the period of the kings, and we're going to be taking a look at that one next time. So let's jump in now with the story of Gideon. So the story of Gideon is pretty great. Gideon is a military leader. He's fighting against the people of Midian, and he has 32,000 guys who are ready to fight for him. But God says, that's way too many guys. If you have that many guys, you're going to think that it's all because of you that you were able to defeat them. And I don't want that. I want the people of Gideon, I want the people of Israel to know that the reason that they won is because they have a great God, not because they have a great army. So God whittles them down to 300 guys, from 32,000 to 300, and when they do that, they actually have this battle in this kind of cool way. They bring a torch, and they bring a jar, and they bring a horn, and so these 300 guys bring these things, and they go at night to the camp of Gideon, and when it's time, they all blow their horns and break the jars and light their torches, and because of that, and because it's at night, and that would have been something that you would have had for maybe every 100 guys. They would have had a torch or a trumpet. The people of Midian feel like, oh man, there's all sorts of people here that are from Israel, and they start to fight one another, and the people of Midian actually kill each other mostly, and so the people of Israel don't actually have to do that. So now we're going to move on to the story of Samson. So you might know kind of the story of Samson. There's two parts that we're going to look at. The first part is that Samson is this mighty warrior, but he has a weakness. And his weakness, a lot of times we say that his weakness is cutting his hair, but really his weakness is that he's a sucker for this lady named Delilah, who is somebody who takes some money from the Philistines that are the enemies of Israel. And they say, hey, we need to find out what Samson's weakness is. And she goes and she tries to find out. He lies to her a couple of times, but he can't keep on lying. He finally tells her the truth. My long hair, if you cut my long hair, then I will not be strong anymore, and you'll be able to capture me. And sure enough, that's what they do, which gets us into Samson part 2. So in Samson part 2, they've locked him away, and he has this one last chance. They bring him out as sort of a party favor or as entertainment for this big party that they're having. And while Samson is there, he says, God, give me the strength to push these pillars away so that the roof falls down on all of these Philistine folks. And it'll take me out too, but I'm willing to let that happen so that we can defeat all of these enemies of Israel. It's a pretty gruesome story if you think about it, but God allows that to happen, and God gives him the strength to push the pillars away, and the roof falls down, and because of that, Israel's enemies rather are defeated. So then we're going to move from there to somebody who is not one of the judges. So all of these, you can kind of see why they were heroes. They were kind of battle people. But Ruth, her story is a little bit different. Her story is a love story that's set in the time period of the judges. So Ruth first shows her love to Naomi. Later on, she also falls in love with a relative of Naomi's named Boaz, and from that they have a son. But her first love is actually shown to her mother-in-law. Her husband dies, and she sticks with her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law's name is Naomi. And so it's this great story of faithfulness. She actually is not an Israelite, but she says, I love you so much that I'm actually going to have your gods be my gods. Your God, the true God, Yahweh, the one that Moses knew, the one that all of the people from the Old Testament have known, that God, I'm going to call him my God. And so she becomes a member of Israel, and through that, she actually becomes the great-great-great-grandmother of King David, and the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great grandmother finally of Jesus. So from Ruth, then we get Samuel. So the story of Samuel is a great story. The story that you took a look at is this story where Samuel is a little baby. Not a little baby, but he's a young guy. He's been living with the priest Eli for quite some time. Eli is not his father, but the way that things happened, his mother wasn't able to conceive, wasn't able to have a child, and so she promised God that once, if she had a child, once that child was able to eat on his own, she would bring him to the temple and he would sort of apprentice being a priest. So Samuel is there, and he hears this voice at night, and it says, Samuel, Samuel. And he runs into Eli's room because he's like, what do you want? And Eli says, I didn't call for you. And he hears it again, and he hears it again. And finally, Eli goes, oh, it's not me calling you. You're not just dreaming this. God is actually trying to get a hold of you. And so he tells Samuel, and the next time that you hear him call, say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. And when he does that, Samuel actually gets some bad news that he has to tell Eli. But because of that, he becomes not only sort of the last judge, so the last kind of hero figure of Israel, but also kind of the first prophet figure of Israel, which is something that we'll take a look at a little bit later on. But a prophet is somebody who speaks God's words to people who need to hear it. And so Samuel becomes the first prophet. He's actually the person who is the one who gets to anoint Israel's first and second kings. And so he's a very important figure in the next stories that we're going to be taking a look at next time. So next time we're going to take a look at the early monarchy of Israel, and we're going to talk about Israel's first king. We're going to talk about Israel's second king, who ends up being the most popular king, King David. And then we're going to talk about Israel's wisest king, King Solomon. So looking forward to talking to you then. And in the meantime, enjoy, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.